Are you a crazy person? When you've got CPS and the cops at your doors and your serious abuse allegations coming from one side, you're sitting there now dealing with 2-3 battles to fight on the legal front. There's no winning. There is only protecting yourself, minimizing damage by not making it worse. I'd like to have full custody of our kids because I'm the only one that makes sure they're bathed, fed, clothed, taken to the doctor. He's never there for anything. In fact, he comes home from work and he expects there to be food on the table before he goes and sits down and starts gaming. Welcome back to the living room where we talk about the things that matter most. I'm Angel Jones, a divorce lawyer with almost 30 years of experience. I've been divorced and remarried. I've got kids, so I get it. We're about to dive into some serious stuff today, narcissism. So take a deep breath, pull up a chair, and let's dive in. So for our viewers, you may notice I'm in a different living room. I'm actually at my producer Jake's house. Look at this cool new place. You guys just moved in like a month ago, over a month ago now.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yes.
Very nice digs.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Love you doing the living room
like,
podcast in our living room. That's amazing.
You've got the largest white couch. No kids.
Yeah.
No kids.
Correct.
Because nobody has a white couch, especially one this big. And kids probably don't have pets either. You don't.
No.
Okay.
Pets.
Well, if you want that couch to stay white, you need to do that.
We're staying on that track.
Well, today I've queued up to talk about narcissism. And there's a couple reasons why. One, it's because every single divorce client I had come in tells me, well, not almost every divorce client I have come in tells me they're divorcing a narcissist. In fact, it's sort of a running joke among divorce attorneys. And yeah, we do joke a little bit about clients, not what they're going through, but this whole idea, they've got their Google JD and Google PhD, and they're out there diagnosing folks as narcissists. And so I want to help people to understand a little bit more about whether they're actually divorcing a narcissist or dealing with a narcissist, living with a true narcissist with NPD, or if they're really maybe just in a, bad relationship cycle, and maybe even exhibiting some narcissistic tendencies themselves along with their spouse. Because I think knowing that distinction helps people make choices in their relationship, not just choices as to do I stay or do I go, but what type of tactics are going to be effective. Because you can't use the same tactics with someone with true NPD and someone who's just kind of being a jerk. And, like boundaries just plain don't work with narcissist.
Did you have to deal with a narcissist at any point in your life? Like, I know you said you were remarried. Did you ever have to go through it?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think that I've ever dealt specifically in a marriage relationship with a real narcissist. I think even in my first marriage that ended in divorce, we were young, we were kids, and definitely in power struggles, definitely did not have good alignment going into that relationship. In fact, we knew each other a month before we, on a lark, decided to elope and go get married. And next thing you know, we were living together. We hadn't even talked about whether we would share a checking account or how we would pay bills or anything like that. And I think we can talk about in a future episode, sort of that idea, like getting aligned financially, being open financially, how important that is, not just for relational well-being, because it's probably top 3 reasons people get divorced are money misunderstandings or money misalignment, but also because you can really get kicked in the head when people are engaging in financial infidelity. But back to what we're talking about, I don't think I personally have been in relationship with a true narcissist in terms of a significant other. I have family members, extended family members that have been in relationship with true narcissists. I have lots of clients who, in fact, have divorced narcissists. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it, but I can definitely tell the difference.
What's the difference between like what someone would label as a narcissist versus a true narcissist?
Well, okay. So there are some very specific things to look at in sort of determining, whether or not someone's a narcissist. But I mean, as a clinician, they would be looking for grandiosity, like someone who is truly grandiose, someone who really has no ability to empathize, someone who it is engaging in very purposeful psychological warfare against people that they're close to. So there's this narcissistic supply that they need in order to feel okay about themselves. So narcissists actually have extremely low self-esteem. So they look externally for validation of who they are as a human being. And they look for people, usually very vulnerable people, who are susceptible to flattery or what's called love bombing. If you meet a person and you become very intense with them, I think some people mistake this idea of like love at first sight and love bombing. They'll be very intense. You're the best thing ever, grand gifts, you're going to never have met someone you connect with, as well as this person. And they'll continue behaving that way so long as you're feeding their supply, for like you're bringing the admiration of their friends, or, telling them how great they are, basically doing what they want, when they want, how they want, and maintaining the image that they're trying to put out there in the world. But almost no one is able to do that for very long. And then you become the worst. Like, there's no in between. And they begin to gaslight you, which is to cause you on purpose to question your viewpoint of reality. A lot of people don't know what gaslight or where this term gaslight came from. And it's from an old movie where there was a man who engaged in psychological warfare against his wife. He purposed to make her believe that she was crazy. And what he did was he actually turned down the lights in their house, which were lit by gas, slowly and slowly, where she was asking, like, are the lights dim? Is it getting darker in here? And he was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, and it was very manipulative, very much on purpose. Like, oftentimes narcissists will like choose a target to set them up for the fall as well. And that's really very different than what most people encounter in relationships. So when we're little, 2, 3 years old, everything is about us. We cannot distinguish, where, a person ends and another begins. In fact, it was kind of funny. My daughter, she's staying with us this semester, and she was in the bathroom. She texted me a picture of herself on the potty with one of her cats on the floor, and he was coming up like, rubbing up next to her leg while she's trying to go to the bathroom, and, hitting her with his tail, and eventually settled at her feet. And that's what she took a picture of. And I'm like, hey, welcome to, this is preparation for motherhood, because isn't that exactly what little kids do? Well, grown-up narcissists are this way. They want your constant attention. Okay. You have to always be there for them. And that's different than, like, for instance, what happens when couples will have kids, and next thing you know, it's, baby makes 3 and the baby has needs and the parents are tired, and maybe dad's not getting enough attention. Maybe even mom's not getting enough consideration, and they become angry with one another because there's this new pressure in the relationship, and they can start to act kind of selfish, like, come on, like, give me some attention. Well, can you see that I'm tired? I haven't gotten 10 minutes to myself. You watch the baby. No, you watch the baby, and nobody really wants to say those kinds of things. But what ends up happening, and I hear this over and over and over, hi, I'm looking to divorce my husband, like what's going on? Yeah, we just, things aren't working. We're fighting a lot. He doesn't help around the house. And in fact, I'd like to have full custody of our kids because I'm the only one that makes sure that they're bathed, fed, clothed, taken to the doctor. He's never there for anything. In fact, he comes home from work and he expects there to be food on the table before he goes and sits down and starts gaming. Now that I don't understand, like grown-ups gaming, me personally, but a lot of times that's what people will decide is narcissism. He only cares about himself. And yes, narcissists are selfish. But to me, that's more of a symptom of overwhelm, poor communication, not having a good plan for how we're going to delegate household responsibilities or child responsibilities. In fact, Jake, okay, so, I'll talk about me and my husband sometimes. My husband and I got into, it was more of a discussion than an argument, but at some point in time, it got a little tense. And, I was, asking him like, what did you think this was going to be? Like, what did you think this relationship was going to be from the beginning? Because we're trying to talk about vision for the future and whatnot. And he was just like, well, here's what I thought. I thought I'm going to be the provider. I'm going to take care of bringing home, the bacon basically, and you are going to take care of the home. And I'm like, are you a crazy person? And here's why I said that. When my husband and I met, I was in, when we first met, I was in undergraduate school. I was student government president at my university. I had a 4-year-old. I was a single parent, and I was headed to law school. So during the time that we were dating, I was in law school and doing, working part-time, taking care of Daniel on my own. We got married while I was in law school, and I moved in with my husband for the first time to take a job with a big law firm in Nashville while I was finishing school. And my husband, he had, like his job, but it was sort of an 8 to 5-er. And we moved forward in that. I mean, I made more money than he did. My job required more hours than he did. And he knew all this was coming on the front end. So for him to kind of like even look back and say, hey, I thought I would be the breadwinner and you would just be a stay-at-home mom, doesn't square from my perspective with anything, any information that man was provided in the first place. And in fact, not even conversations that we had square with that. But it doesn't change the fact that like maybe when he was young, he kind of saw that growing up and he just sort of thought that's the way things work. And, he became frustrated and he became irritated and he didn't want to help. And I ended up carrying a lot of the burden. I mean, granted, Daniel was my son before we got married, but like when you get married and you have a kid, you're getting married to a person with a kid, you're taking on some parental responsibility. You're taking on responsibilities, of being a partner to your new spouse. Okay. So there's some amount of that. So how exactly am I supposed to take care of my kid on my own and take care of the household and work my job? Oh, wait. And also take care of a new baby man that's supposed to be my partner who's not there. And so you can see like how quickly that can lead to frustration on both sides. But anyway, I digress a little bit there.
Wow. What, when you say, okay, so we know the difference between more of a real versus fake narcissist. We get that. What are some
real versus fake? Well, and I wouldn't say that. I would say it's NPD is a psychological diagnosis. Like here's, for instance, another thing that people throw around. Oh, she's bipolar. Okay, she may be moody Okay. And a lot of women are postpartum, have some mood swings, or even monthly moods can go up and down. And also people under stress can be very snappish and moody, whether you're male or female. Okay. Bipolar disorder is a very specific disorder where people swing from periods of depression to mania. Okay. People who are moody are not bipolar, in the same way that people who are selfish and irritated and acting like a jerk, who can apologize, who, yes, they may be impossible, especially during arguments, but eventually, they tend to come around. They do make amends, and it's not just a false manipulation as a part of abuse cycle to set you up for, knocking you down again. There's the difference. And the vast majority of people are, who are in, especially I would say toxic marital relationships, are not involved with a person with NPD, even in like divorce, post-divorce relationships, having difficult co-parenting, interactions, are not dealing with a true narcissist. They're dealing with someone who's frustrated and behaving selfishly in most cases. And people tend to double down. Oh, okay, you're gonna be like that. So I'm gonna match and raise you on that. In fact, I've said that myself at times because, I'm competitive. I don't want to lose. If you're going to set up a win-lose, I'm not going to lose. You know what I mean? So.
Nice. And what are some of are you able to share any of the crazy stories that you've seen with like what a real narcissist is doing in modern day? We know what we did back in the day, but like
sure.
day.
Well, in here, I want to kind of make this clear. You and I kind of talk about this. I know you're always kind of pushing me to tell the juicy stories, like all these crazy juicy stories that divorce lawyers have.
That's what people want.
That's what the people want. Here's what people don't want. They don't ever want to go to a lawyer, okay, and tell about the most intimate struggles in their life, the crazy, dirty laundry going on. And one day turn on a podcast and hear that, their story is being described as, I had this client, Blake, not Jake. I've changed his name to protect the innocent, So what I'm able to do, and I've spent some time doing it, is sort of, I can describe to you situations like, like based on a true story, we will discuss some things that have, gone on. And I can do that. But at no point in time am I going to talk about like my actual clients in any way that's going to, expose them. And I mean, I would hope that even if a client were to hear something and pick up something in the story that reminds them of their own story, that these are all very common. This is not, I like to say it's like, you're unique, just like everybody else, if that makes sense. And we're all very unique, but it's variations on a theme. And that's why I think it's actually important to point this out, because you're not alone. You're not the only person that has gone through this stuff. And you are in a tough spot. Not everything in life is easy. Not everything in life is meant to be easy. And in fact, it's the hard stuff and making it through the hard stuff that often, develops our character, that shapes who we are, that serves as the platform, to our contributions in the world. And I think especially with our own kids, for me right now, I've had to really dig in, and I'm just, I've shared some of it, but like one of the things that almost stopped me from doing this podcast, and it's not I got all let me give you some advice as a lawyer and I can give you these techniques and, here's what I've seen work, especially, in a co-parenting situation or, leverage points in a divorce, things like that. But this relationship stuff is hard and I am in it. I'm not always winning it. Sometimes I'm really not winning it at all, which is why I want to shout out like that little girl, hey friend, you're doing great. You're winning at life by just showing up, and working at it, especially if you're doing it for your kids, for your legacy. If we can keep that eye on the ball, not here's who we are today and the muck is in it, because then we can get stuck. We can get stuck in this downward spiral. But rather, we want to set our eyes on, who we want to be or who we need to be, in order to make this easier. Like, what kind of person could navigate this situation easier, and then get those skills, get the support to become that person. And so that's why I'm pressing forward with it, because even showing up here today forces me to deal with my shit. So
that's really good. So I know you can't discuss specific client stuff, but how would you keep going down the path of giving self-awareness to people who are in this situation and they're trying to figure out, like, am I actually living with a narcissist? Am I not? Or maybe it's like, hey, we actually need to just work on us.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, here's I'm going to kind of set this up as like, there's a couple different ways here. So I don't remember the pastor, but there was this idea came from a pastor. This specific analogy is we have to determine whether or not we're in a house on fire, or maybe the roof is on fire, or we're in a house with a leaking roof. Okay. If you're in a house on fire, you have to get out pretty freaking quickly. And I mean, maybe the house can be restored, maybe, you know what I mean? But if the smoke in the house is going to kill you if the fire doesn't get you, you know what I mean? And so you have to determine if you're in a house on fire or if you're in a house with a leaky roof. You could be in a house with a leaky roof longer. Okay. You definitely want to stop the leaks. You definitely want to clean up the water damage because, mold is toxic also, right? But being with a narcissist is like being in a house with the roof on fire. Okay. Being in a house with a partner who's behaving narcissistically, and maybe you're engaged in some of that stuff too, is like being in a house with a leaky roof. So I'm going to describe to you first, like a guy, we'll just call him John, who was married to a person who, took his breath away at first sight. And, this gal was the bee's knees and just thought, he was something else. Super impressed with what he'd been able to do in the military, showing him off to her, family, friends as, the greatest, he could do no wrong. I mean, and we've all met, those proud to be Americans who, want to thank their service member. But this gal was just over the top and made him feel like $1 million. I mean, because this guy was, he was a relatively mid-ranking enlisted guy and, wasn't used to receiving those kind of accolades. But really, really quickly, once he got into relationship with her, he realized that, and some people may call it kind of gold digging, but she was definitely using him to climb, and so his utility with her was extraordinarily short-lived. And this happens actually a fair amount of time they call them dependas in the military. They're getting married to a guy with a certain amount of rank so that they can get out of one situation into a better situation. And many, many of these types of women, narcissistic type women, will be looking around, have affairs, cheat on guys who are deployed when they find someone they think is a level up. And I'm not talking about your garden variety lonely hoes. I am seriously talking about people who are just climbing. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you're laughing, Jake, but I'm telling you, there are people out there who do this, who are using people to climb. So what John went through, maybe I should have called him Joe, but anyway, what John went through is that when the utility was up, let's just call her Maria. Maria took his kids, took everything he had in the house. Then he showed up, to a dark, empty house, no kid, no wife, no money in the bank, and she was gone. She had moved in with, some guy who maybe, I don't know that this guy outranked, because I don't know who exactly, the fellow was that she hooked up with, but she found herself a better deal. Who, by the way, she was touting to her friends on social media as, being the very best, the bee's knees. John was awful. F and G, the fucking new guy, was, amazing, and the best toward her kids, would do things he wouldn't do. And what proceeded, from there are allegations of domestic abuse, allegations of child abuse, okay, during the divorce. So this guy is afraid for his military career, because even making those allegations ended up like requiring an investigation, especially when she had claimed that he engaged in marital rape. In most states, actually, you used to not be able to rape your spouse. There are a couple states where you cannot be charged with raping your spouse, but in almost every state you can. And definitely when it comes to military members, that's going to get you put out. It's not just going to get you put in jail, but it's going to cause dishonorable discharge. I mean, it's a life wrecker. So next thing you know, this guy's like, basically hands up against, the wall, and she's getting everything she wants. Like, hey, I'll drop this. I won't press for that if you give me what I want, which is essentially always, equity in the house, half of your, savings, child support, and most of the time with the kid, especially with a military member, because they move, right? So, flash forward, and, this guy's broke and a joke. He doesn't have time with his kids. And now when he does get time with his kids, she's sending little Johnny for spring break with shorts when it's not shorts weather where dad is stationed. So he's paying child support. He doesn't get to see his kids, and he has to take his kid out and, either blow his food budget buying the kid clothes or buy a bunch of clothes at Goodwill, which is super impressive to Johnny. I mean, it's on and on and on. Everything is a battle. At every single little turn, Maria's, making a big deal out of exchanges, pushing, for more and more. And anytime he doesn't want to do something, she says there's more threats. She slams him on social media, maligns him to her friends and family, and even is starting to talk down, about him to his son. And this is the life he's stuck with, because he didn't recognize what he was getting into from the beginning. It sounds kind of hopeless, right?
Yeah.
So what's he supposed to do?
So at that point, does he come to you? Where does he go?
Well, I mean, he came, like, in the first place, he went to a divorce attorney who got this whole situation set up. But that's what I'm saying. When you're dealing with a narcissist, they're going scorched earth. Like, hey, it's not, hey, we don't get along. Of course, our child needs to have the most time with you as they can in order to be healthy. It's all about them. And it's about, oh, I'm leaving you because I'm cheating, but I have to make it about, oh, you're a terrible person. You did horrible things. They make up lies about what's going on because they're trying to maintain to everybody in the world, and maybe even to themselves, about how great they are. And they can only do that by tearing other people down. That's a part of the insidious nature of it. And it is a truly, truly difficult position for people to be in.
Wow. So what, I mean, I think the point of this show is you're wanting to, there's obviously probably some people that are listening to that and going, okay, actually my spouse isn't as bad as I thought. Well,
and that's kind of it. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. That's exactly right. I mean, and I could tell you, stories about men who, and in fact, to be honest, it's more often a man who behaves narcissistically, or what's stereotypically narcissistically, and more people diagnosed with MPD are men than women. But women, it's kind of like serial killers or other psychopaths or, sociopaths. For whatever reason, that pathology just tends to be more prevalent, in males, but it certainly shows up in females. But yeah, it's the same kind of stuff. Although most of the time, men, I don't see men getting, to be honest with you, even narcissistic men getting quite as vicious. They have a tendency more to throw people away, to withhold financial support, just to toss aside their kids, blame it on mom, tell lies about, oh, well, I can't do this with you because I have to pay your mom, child support, or your mom won't let me see you, which is why I'm not showing up. So it manifests differently. So it's more tossing away of the wife and the family that goes on, or making interactions just brutal.
So you got people who are thinking about, okay, my marriage isn't that bad. We can get to those people in a second. But then you've got the people who are in, let's say, John's position, whether male or female. I'm assuming most narcissists are probably not listening to this show. Most likely.
No, most of the
not.
people who are going to listen to this are going to be people who are trying to figure out, am I divorcing a narcissist? Is my spouse a narcissist? Have I divorced a narcissist? And they've done a lot of research. I mean, there's nobody who, is considering that, who hasn't done a great deal of research. And that's what I'm telling you, Jake. People show up on the regular saying, hey, I know that everybody says this, but for reals, my spouse is a narcissist. Let me tell you why. And almost always it's their spouse is dismissive, their spouse is stonewalling, their spouse may be sick of their bullshit, and have very poor communication, relationship, negotiation skills. Like, here's a good, for instance, I had a gal approach me, who was very concerned about her spouse not following their court orders. Okay. And the long and the short of it is, this person was supposed to pay for certain expenses and kept sending her receipts to pay for these expenses. And they were in this back and forth, hey, here's these expenses. Why are you sending me these expenses? I'm not supposed to pay for these expenses. Oh, well, I wonder what my lawyer's going to say when I tell him you won't pay for these expenses. And, so she's in defensive mode. She's like, bro, can you not read in black and white? It's right here in the court order. And getting into this back and forth arguing where he can read just as clearly as she can what she has to pay for and what he has to pay for. But instead of dealing in the same reality, oh, I know, I'm going to jack around with you by sending you receipts. And then when you say something, I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm going to say something else that makes you doubt your sanity. Oh, I wonder what my lawyer, who actually is an expert in this stuff, is going to say about it. He's not saying he's actually talked to his lawyer. And so by the time, this lady's talking to me, I'm kind of like, sis, here's what you tell this guy. Okay, I will pay for ... as set forth in the court order, period. Well, okay, and then I'll say this and I'll say that. No, sis, I will pay for ... That's set forth in the court order, period. You can't negotiate. You don't argue. You have to be very firm, very clear in your boundaries, keeping it, really, really tight, documented, not getting sucked into the nonsense. The problem is she's still not clear on who she's dealing with. And in this particular situation, if that person isn't a narcissist, this is very, very common and classic narcissistic behavior. And there's specific ways to deal with it.
So you seem to have two different types of advice for people because you really care about people as like individuals, but you also are a pretty kick-ass lawyer in terms of making sure people have what they need. You have somebody who is in the John situation of going through, we'll just call it like, could we call it narcissistic abuse in a sense? Okay. How would you give advice for both sides of the spectrum at a broad level?
Well, number one is narcissists cannot change. They will not change. So you have to deal with what is. Once you're able to identify that you're actually dealing with a narcissist, you have to begin to deal with, essentially counter-terrorist techniques. That's it. I mean, you cannot negotiate with terrorists. Terrorists are going to do what they're going to do. You have to engage in strategic warfare with them, because, and it's guerrilla warfare. Did we ever win Vietnam? No, we did not. There's no winning. There is only protecting yourself, minimizing damage by not making it worse. And I would say to any person who's in a relationship or has to deal with a true narcissist on an ongoing basis, that they really need to engage a licensed therapist to help them understanding what they're dealing with and to cope with it, because it is something that's going to need to be coped with on, an ongoing basis. And you have to also understand, if you're dealing in a divorce scenario, that they're going to weaponize the divorce process. Okay. And so one of the things that, we do is we try to be very, very proactive when we identify, even if it's narcissistic behavior, because we can't always tell on the front end exactly what we're dealing with, to minimize their ability to weaponize, the divorce process. Like I'm bringing to mind, like what's one thing that's coming to mind is something that happened, not too long ago. It's relatively common that, a parent's, like a 16-year-old kid decides, hey, I want to go live with other parent. Okay. And parents start to talk about it. Right now they're sharing 50-50. And we're like, oh, well, doesn't the kid get to choose? Well, in Colorado, kids don't get to choose. They don't let the tail wag the dog in that way. In some states they do, but not in Colorado. So, so mom and dad are talking about it, kids at, let's say, mom's house. And, yeah, mom, I really want to come stay over here. Dad's like, oh, he wants to come stay over here because he's got no rules. It turns into this, argument. And, kid goes back home. Next thing you know, mom is hit with a protective order against her husband, a emergency motion to restrict parenting time, and CPS and the cops are knocking on the door. Because weirdly, all of a sudden, there are allegations of abuse going on in mom's house. Like they were 50-50 parents, all was Gucci until 16-year-old wanted to stay at mom and parents had, a fight over it. And that is altogether common. And so what ended up happening is, like, when you've got CPS and the cops at your doors and there's serious abuse allegations coming from one side, they've gotten a temporary restraining order that's issued based upon the allegations of one person. There's a motion to restrict parenting time also that the courts rule on based upon the allegations of one motion. You're sitting there now dealing with 2-3 battles to fight on a legal front. And they strategically do these things to get leverage in the situation. Hey, I'll tell you what, if we just keep things the same, all this goes away. And you would think, well, crap, that's not fair, right? That's not fair. How can they do that? They're lying. Yeah, they're lying. And liars are going to lie. And now, because they've weaponized the legal process, you now essentially have a burden of defending yourself. Maybe not the burden of proof, but you've got to show up. In most cases, you need to lawyer up because, how are you supposed to prove a negative? especially if you've got an investigator saying, hey, I've talked to X child and X child has given us information that supports what's being said here. You don't have any access to even talk to the child. You aren't told what's being said. And so it's kind of like a person who's being called in as a person of interest, you know, by the police. You've got, while we're technically innocent until proven guilty, don't we all sort of think, you know, hey, the police wouldn't be saying there's something going on or suspect you if there was absolutely nothing to go on. And it's, can you imagine your stress level at the very least is completely through the roof. And if this person does this one time, two times, three times, it can be financially devastating. It can ruin new relationships. And I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times that one of the parents would accuse the new step parent of some type of abuse. This is completely common.
Wow. I have a question. This is a little bit more on the feel side. Is it really common for people who are on the victim side of this to deal with high levels of depression, high levels of suicidal thoughts? How likely is that?
Well, okay. So most people who have been in relationship with a narcissist, I mean, they were married, they were with them long enough to have a kid, or even if they weren't, didn't have children or whatever, most of them suffer from some amount of post-traumatic stress. You know, I don't know that they're all diagnosed with PTSD, but it's a recovery. There's a recovery that's required from these relationships. But it's exacerbated when you cannot actually get away from the person because you share a child with them.
You're so good at this in terms of truth with people. What truths do people need to re-accept when they're on the other side of a situation it feels a bit out of their control? What types of truths do they need to know or maybe be reminded of if they're listening to this?
Again, it's like, it's similar to like any kind of situation. MPD is a mental health disorder. Okay. It stinks. I saw, you know what? I'm not 100% sure how to like really provide a boatload of help per se, because it's just a crappy situation. I think what's important for people in, hindsight's, always 2020, is to really think long and hard, really make sure they get to know yourself too, because there are certain personalities that are more susceptible to being, getting into relationships with people with narcissism. But there's a new show out on Netflix. I think it's called Adolescent.
We just watched it.
Bro.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one, don't sleep on that because it was crazy. And so setting the scene, like essentially it starts with this young kid, cute little towhead, like little curly headed, freckle faced boy, skinny, getting arrested by the police on, suspected murder. And he wets himself. He's so scared, and I don't want to tip any spoilers or anything like that, ruin the show for anyone. But the family, what I loved about the show is when they showed the family, what the family had to go through and the guilt that the family suffered and the legal trash and the collateral damage to everyone in the family as a result of, the incidents that led to this, arrest. I mean, even the accusation of, what had happened, which was the boy was accused of murdering a girl in his class. And, just dealing with that. And it's a similar thing, you're in it. It is what it is. Those kinds of things, like the family, at the end, I will tip my hand on this, is one thing is like they were getting, a lot of harassment, I would say, in their neighborhood. And so they were like, well, maybe we should move, just to get away from, the situation. But it's like, you can't get away from the stink. You know what I mean? And so they had discussed moving, but they decided like, hey, look, we can't move because this is going to follow us. This is just a part of our story at this point in time. And so there are better and worse ways to handle these kinds of situations. And one of the things that helps people navigate them well is to accept what is. If you continue to believe that a person who cannot change will change, you're going to keep yourself in a crazy cycle. If you allow yourself to be manipulated by a master manipulator, you're going to get knocked over time and time again. You're the one who can step out of the abuse cycle with a narcissist. On the flip side is most people are not actually married to or have children with narcissists. It's a relatively low percentage of the population that have it. So most people are going to fall into the second category, which is you're in a toxic relationship. And the best news about that is that things like individual therapy, couples therapy, communication classes, work, having good boundaries, documenting communications, flipping over to using parenting apps, having good, strong, well-written agreements, and that those actually go a super long way. Consequences, bringing contempts. Like I have a client who was married to a narcissist, like bona fide narcissist, who, I'm gonna tip my hand on this one just a little bit in case he hears about himself. Where it was very clear in the parenting order that he was not to treat their child, for medical conditions. And he was the one that insisted on having that written into the agreement in the first place as a control measure on my client, right? And he decided at one point in time to begin treating the child for an issue he thought he had with vitamins. And he was held in contempt for that. And he fought that all the way up to the Court of Appeals when there was no doubt, there was no controversy that that's exactly what he was doing. I mean, he tried, even though he said it in the hearing that, yes, I was giving this child these vitamins, and had written it down. Hey, it's supposed to help with this, type of malady that the kid had. But, even tried to lie to the court. I mean, it was double talk and double speak the whole way. Cost my clients thousands and thousands and thousands upon dollars for that little one teeny piece of the case, because this guy was just going to do what he wanted, double down, triple down on it. Still to this day, having lost, he will still maintain that he did nothing wrong, that he was awesome, she was the worst. And that's what we're dealing with. Fortunate, for our client, we established on the front end, what our parameters were with this. And you sometimes just have to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to let a person, bully me into not doing what's best for my kid. Other kind of things I'll let, slide. He can be annoying to me, showing up late, pretending like we didn't have discussions about, what to send over. But if you're actually going to do something that is detrimental to my kid, then I'm going to fight it to the mattresses and, you save up for when you need to do that.
And to wrap things up, what do you feel like is the most helpful thing for people to either know or do as a result of what they know now?
Well, I think what's, to me, the most helpful thing to know is you're probably not married to or parenting with a narcissist, a true narcissist. And there is, help and hope that is available to you. If you suspect you're married to, or maybe, need to divorce a narcissist, there are lawyers and other professionals out there who are informed in dealing with NPD. And so you can identify those and they can help you. But there are resources for people who are in toxic relationships where, and maybe I'll share about that in another episode specifically, where it really only takes one person to change a toxic dynamic. Even if your spouse won't do anything else, there are lots and lots of shifts. Even if your ex won't do better, there are lots and lots of shifts that you can take to take control back in your life and get yourself on, a better, different path forward for you and your kids.
So cool.
Yeah.
Any other words before closing everything out?
Well, I just want to, thank everyone for joining us in the living room. If you have found this helpful to you, share it with your friends, like and subscribe so that you'll end up getting notifications of future episodes. I think they're dropping like every Monday from here on out. And, in the meantime, you're not in this alone. Take good care of yourself this week, and we'll see you next time.